news, bad news, bad news. Nobody wants to ever be the deliverer of bad news. We all want to sit there and live in this wonderful, happy-go-lucky world where we get to deliver positive news, except if you're going to be a supervisor, if you're going to be a leader, if you're going to be a manager, this is part of the turf that you go through. Sometimes goals in communicating, you want to make certain if you communicate the bad news clearly and completely, project a professional image as you go through, convey empathy and sensitivity in the process, be fair and impartial as you go through. I've gone through and I've had people come in for formal disciplinary action based upon recommendation from the supervisor. And with the supervisor sitting right there, the employee challenges the aspect of the supervisor as to what they're saying. I have had to stop processes and saying, you're saying this, this, this. Yes. Look at the supervisor. Okay, so we're going to put this on hold and I'm going to check this out. What? You can't do that. I just did. Okay, so that being said, we'll meet again sometime in the future and then send the employee out. I talk to the supervisor. I do some more exploration. Multiple times I reversed or modified what the supervisor was trying to do. And one time I ended up having to reprimand the supervisor for them being a sloppy leader in the process and for them not being fully honest and transparent and looking like they're discriminating against the employee as you go through. So that fair and impartial, that should be part of every leader's vocabulary. You want to have friendly relations if you're going to go through and be involved in discipline. Discipline the action without damaging the person. Separate the things that they do from the person themselves. Don't attack the person. Make certain it's clear you're attacking the action that that person did. By the way, in this picture, yes, I know that they're same gender, but the reality is don't touch in the workplace. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. People file all kinds of claims nowadays. This is just something you don't want to be involved with at all in the process. Whenever you deliver a positive message, I encourage you to use the active voice with a direct strategy. You don't always do this for a negative message. As a matter of fact, you do the opposite. Instead of an active voice, you use a passive voice. It's called the indirect strategy, and it sits down there and it softens the impact as you go through. By the way, even some of the stuff, okay, positive memos can be dangerous. Do not send them for ordinary work for mediocrity. Don't try to save a bad employee with nice memos for mediocre work. And don't give a slack or a good memo and forget about the hard worker that's been sitting quiet in the back corner all the time. A lot of times a bad employee, they cause so much distraction from the reality, you forget about all the good ones that support you as a supervisor go through. One time I had a supervisor and she sat there and she went over the years and she was frustrated by this one employee. She sat down there and there was a negative memo and then a second negative memo in the file over a 3-year period. She sat there and gave a mediocre performance evaluation, didn't follow through on an annual basis like she's supposed to in the process. And so she sat down there and all of a sudden a positive memo came through by this employee. I was skeptical. I looked at the memo and I thought, okay, this is the same person who doesn't do their job. Okay, all right. So I filed it away because she had carbon copied the personnel file. A second one came through and I called her up. I says, what are you doing? I says, the memo, this is the second one you sent. I says, this is just their job. I said, I got the job description here. They're doing their job and you're getting them a positive memo for doing their job. Just, I'm trying to encourage them by trying to sit down and encourage them to do their work. I said, this is not the strategy to follow. She says, trust me, I know what I'm doing. The third memo came through and I rolled my eyeballs in the back of my head and everything else. And I thought, okay, we'll see what happens. And 2 weeks later, boom, it hit. She's in my office. She's on the edge of tears, ready to fire this person because they're incompetent on a good day. They don't do work. They blow off time. They're not there all the time. They're rude. They're obnoxious to customers as they go through. And she said she's upset. And I said, what did you expect? I says, let's see what we have over here. So I pull it out. Over the last 5 years, the employee had 2 evaluations. One was positive and one was very negative from the same supervisor, the one in front of me. She had 3 positive memos and 2 negative ones over that time period. Pretty much, if you're going to terminate somebody, you have to sit down and start weighing things in the process. Actually, right now, the positivity was higher than the negativity in the personnel file. She wanted to fire him. Fortunately, we did fire him, but not because of her, because he verbally abused multiple other people, and I got documentation. We got rid of the employee. She should have been reprimanded by her supervisor because she wasn't supervising very well. But really, at the end of the day, she didn't need to be reprimanded. She was busy reprimanding herself for giving a bad employee positive memos in the process. Sometimes, by the way, the employee of the year, they can be political campaigns where, oh, let's all lobby for this person over here. That person is a mediocre employee. They're not employee of the year. They're employee of the day for one time when they finally show up to work on time. So that being said, employee of the year campaigns, be cautious about creating one unless the supervisor has input as to who that would be. One time I had a case of a gentleman, he had a disability, and the disability, he would get seizures sometimes at work. Now, that being said, he ended up exhausting all of his sick days, and he also had a vision problem. He was a custodian, and literally he couldn't see dirt. And you go through his cleaning area, he'd ignore all kinds of dust built up on top of desks, on top of window ledges and everything else. You could take your finger, run it across a window ledge, and your finger would come back covered in dirt and ick as you go through the process. It had been cleaned in a long time. A campaign for Employee of the Year. He wasn't Employee of the Year, but the problem is not so much about him getting that award. The problem was there's 4 or 5 other people who did a fabulous job all the time, but because some union president got it in her mind to go through and do a campaign, he became Employee of the Year. Be careful about Employee of the Year because of the fact when you award that, that also gives them a pass if they ever have to go through disciplinary action. Then, oh, I was Employee of the Year 2 years ago, and now this supervisor is picking on me. By the way, it works that way too. So one use of direct strategy when the bad news isn't damaging, when a receiver may overlook the bad news. Sometimes people are oblivious as to what's going on. If you're going to deliver bad news, sometimes you need to sit down and map it. If you continue to follow the same path of behavior you're following right now, I expect to terminate you in the next 3 months. That's pretty clear, but sometimes you've got to be pretty clear to get the message across. When the organization or receiver prefers, tell me the truth, just don't tell me direct, don't tell them, okay? Or when firmness is necessary. Voice needs to be considered in the process. Active voice, passive voice. That really is going to be your decision at that moment. Sometimes a passive voice is better, especially if the person is self-motivated. One time I made a horrible blunder at work. I was in charge of facilities and transportation at a K-12 school district. I was director of facilities. And I would get up in the morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I would watch the weather reports because we lived in a snow state, and I was the official snow person for the district. I would get up and listen to everything else. I called my guy on the phone. Okay, are the plow trucks working? Yeah, we're in good shape. We'll handle this, no problem. I'd call back. I says, other districts are having problems with this. How's it going? Oh, no problem. I says, the weather people are saying 6 inches of snow. No, we're on top of it. We can open. And by the time it was all done, I called my boss, the superintendent of schools, at 5:10 in the morning. I'll never forget that. I says, my crew has the lots all plowed and everything else. And finally, I got a call 10 minutes later, and the superintendent says, David, I know what you've been saying all morning long. That being said, I'm going to close because most of the rest of the district, most of the rest of the county closed. We closed. I got in my car, I drove down there, and my 15-minute drive took me 50 minutes to get there, and they pulled in. It was a disaster as you went through because nobody could drive on the roads. That being said, I sat down there. He didn't have to say a word. I walked into his office. I says, you don't have to say anything. I blew it this time. I'm not going to trust the people to plow. I'm going to leave the warmth of my house and go out and check it myself from now on. All right, David, that's all he had to say. Because I was a self-motivated person, I realized I screwed up. He didn't just say, you really screwed up. He didn't need to do that because I did it myself. You'll have employees that will do the same thing. Sometimes use indirect strategy, okay, when the bad news is personal upsetting, when it's going to provoke a hostile reaction. I've been in a couple meetings. I've had one of my police officers sitting right there with me, just in case, when the bad news threatens the customer relationship or the bad news is unexpected. Sometimes you use the indirect as you go through. 67% of all lawsuits between employer and employee, that's 2/3 of them, result with how someone was released. Not necessarily about the actions as to why, but how. Everybody is entitled to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes on the way out the door. Never attack a person, only sit there focusing on the actions that led to your final decision. So compare them as you go through. Direct strategy, when it's bad news, and get the reasons and close. If it's indirect, put a buffer in there in the process, and that'll sit down and help save you and save them a little bit of an issue. A buffer, it's an open with a neutral but meaningful statement that doesn't mention the bad news, and it helps provide causes for the bad news before disclosing it, and then you finally reveal it as you go through, and then finally you close with some type of pleasant statement if you can do that without referring back to that news. Here's a good quote, and I want to make certain I included it here. It's much, much worse to receive bad news through the written word than by somebody simply telling you, and I'm sure you understand why. When somebody simply tells you bad news, you hear it once, and that's the end of it. But when bad news is written down, whether in a letter or newspaper or on your arm and felt tip pen, each time you read it, you feel as if you're receiving the bad news again and again and again. If you've ever gotten bad news, realize if it's in writing, and usually it ends up being having to be delivered that way, people go back and they read it again and again and again. And every time they read it, they become angry at the message. They become angry at the sender as you go through. So bad news. Generally, we use passive voice for bad news. And remember the 4-part indirect strategy. Take care.